Nathan Cole, a wealthy and influential figure, was accustomed to having everything go his way. Confidence and arrogance followed him in every business deal, every gathering, and especially in his personal life. At an extravagant Los Angeles party one evening, surrounded by some of the city's most elite, he found himself in a challenging conversation with Victor, his longtime friend and occasional rival. With a mischievous glint in his eye, Victor leaned in. "Nathan, you've conquered nearly everything you've set your mind to, but I doubt you'd have the nerve to try something different, like marrying someone who doesn't fit your usual standards." Nathan, who was known for dating glamorous women who complimented his high society image, raised an eyebrow at Victor's audacity. His interest piqued. "And what's in it for me?" Nathan asked, his voice smooth but competitive. "A cool $500,000, Victor replied, raising his glass. "All you have to do is marry her and stay married for 6 months." Nathan, feeling the familiar rush of competition and drawn by the thrill of a financial wager, agreed without hesitation. To him, it seemed like just another conquest, another prize to win. The woman Victor had in mind was Jade Summers, a strong-willed, independent woman who, in Victor's words, was unlike any other woman Nathan had known. Intrigued by the challenge, Nathan accepted, confident that this would be no different from any other goal he'd set for himself. A few days after the bet was struck, Nathan received details about Jade. She was intelligent, driven, and entirely uninterested in the trappings of luxury. These traits only added to her appeal in Nathan's eyes. Used to being in control, he wondered how a woman like her would respond to his charms and influence. They met for the first time at an upscale restaurant that Nathan had selected, expecting to impress her with the luxurious setting. Jade entered the room with a calm, unshakable confidence. She scanned the restaurant briefly before spotting him, meeting his gaze with a look of quiet defiance rather than awe. "You must be Nathan Cole," she said directly, taking her seat across from him with a composed expression. "And you must be Jade Summers," Nathan replied, extending his hand. Jade looked at it for a brief moment, then shook it firmly, showing him she was not intimidated. "Let's not waste any time here," Jade said with a clear, direct tone. "I know about the bet, and I know exactly what the terms are." Nathan blinked, surprised at her frankness, but he kept his expression neutral. "And yet, you still agreed to meet with me," he replied, curious about her motives. Jade paused, looking directly at him. "Let's just say I have my reasons. And let's be clear, 6 months is 6 months. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken." Nathan smiled, impressed and intrigued. Jade was proving to be more of a challenge than he'd anticipated, which only made the situation more appealing. She was unlike any woman he'd ever met. She was unafraid of him and wasn't swayed by his wealth. Nathan found himself even more invested in the idea of winning her over. Days passed, and Nathan couldn't stop thinking about how to proceed with Jade. Used to always having the upper hand, he felt slightly off balance, yet he was determined to win her over. Their second meeting was at a simple coffee shop, Jade's suggestion. When Nathan arrived, Jade was already there, sipping tea with a relaxed smile. This wasn't the kind of place Nathan usually frequented, but he accepted her choice, hoping to learn more about her. They talked for a while, exchanging polite, surface-level details, but soon Jade got straight to the point. "If we're really doing this," she said, placing her cup down firmly, "there are a few things I need to make clear. I'm not here for your money or your luxurious lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and when it's over, I plan to walk away exactly the same as I came in." Nathan studied her face, noting the sincerity in her expression. Jade was serious, and she wasn't hiding it. "So, what do you want?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," Jade replied without a moment's hesitation. "Even though we're entering into this arrangement, I won't be controlled by you." I have my own life, and that's not going to change just because of a temporary marriage. Nathan found himself smiling, nodding in agreement. To him, marriage was simply a formality for the bet, so if Jade wanted to maintain her independence, that was fine by him. Fair enough, he agreed. 6 months, and then we go our separate ways? Jade held his gaze for a moment longer, as if evaluating his sincerity. She had accepted this challenge with a purpose, and she would ensure that it played out according to her terms. As the wedding approached, Nathan continued to feel that perhaps this game wasn't as simple as he'd expected. The wedding itself was a cold, businesslike affair, with little ceremony or romance. Nathan, always strategic, already considered himself the winner of the bet. He assumed that 6 months would pass quickly and that Jade would eventually warm up to the luxurious life he could offer her. After the ceremony, he took her to his penthouse, a sprawling symbol of his wealth, with glass walls overlooking the city and interiors filled with rare and expensive decor. To Nathan, this was where he would win Jade over by showing her the power of his world. But as soon as she stepped into the penthouse, Jade's expression remained neutral. She didn't appear impressed or even interested. 6 months, Nathan, she said with a steady gaze, walking toward the windows and taking in the cityscape without a hint of awe. Not a day more. Nathan smiled, feeling confident despite her resistance. He was used to this kind of challenge, and every woman he'd ever known had eventually yielded to his charm and wealth. Jade, he told himself, would be no different. In the days following their wedding, Nathan began his attempts to win Jade over, confident that she'd eventually appreciate the lifestyle he could offer. He showered her with designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and exclusive trips, expecting that Jade would start to embrace the luxurious world he inhabited. But to his surprise and growing frustration, Jade refused it all, holding firm to her modest routine. "I don't need these things, Nathan," she would say, with a calmness that both intrigued and unsettled him. No matter how hard he tried, Jade remained indifferent to his wealth, and her insistence on maintaining her independence only deepened Nathan's determination. He was used to controlling the people and situations around him, but Jade's refusal to bend to his will struck a nerve. Determined to gain the upper hand, Nathan started applying more pressure. He stopped her from going to work, telling her she didn't need to earn a paycheck now that she was his wife. When she protested, he manipulated her schedule, forcing her to wait hours for meetings he'd set up, only to cancel them at the last moment. Jade's response was unyielding. She was a solid wall against every attempt Nathan made to control her, and her resistance only intensified his desire to win. Their relationship turned into a tense game of power and endurance, with small provocations surfacing in even the most trivial conversations. Jade's sharp words often diffused Nathan's attempts to assert himself, but it wasn't just her defiance that was beginning to unnerve him. He was starting to feel something more. One night, after an especially tense day, Nathan found himself feeling both frustrated and curious about Jade. Why didn't she want what he had to offer? What was she truly after? Trying a new approach, he opened up a more personal conversation. "I don't understand you, Jade," he admitted, his tone softer than usual. "Any other woman would be thrilled to live in luxury, but you act as if it's worthless. What do you really want?" Jade, who had been calmly listening, finally lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made his breath catch. "What do I want?" she repeated, her voice steady. "I want respect, Nathan. I'm not a pawn in your game. Money may buy power, but it can't buy dignity or integrity. You might have all this," she said, gesturing around the lavish penthouse, "but deep down, you're empty inside. And that's what you can't stand." Her words hit Nathan harder than he'd anticipated. For the first time, he felt that he might be losing something beyond just control. Jade wasn't just resisting him, She was unraveling the carefully constructed facade he'd built over the years. No one had ever spoken to him like this, and the fact that Jade seemed to see beyond his wealth made him feel exposed in a way that he couldn't ignore. Instead of backing down, Nathan tightened his grip, determined to make Jade realize that without him, her life would be much harder. He began to close off her contacts, cutting her off from her professional network and shutting down opportunities that could advance her career. He even went as far as to sabotage important events she was organizing, thinking this would make her rely on him. But Jade was unshakable. She weathered every setback with a calm strength that only made Nathan's frustration grow. No matter what he did, Jade refused to yield, her resilience acting as a mirror to his own insecurities. Every time he tried to pull her into his orbit, she pushed back with equal force, and he couldn't help but admire her strength, even as he resented her defiance. Their relationship had turned into a minefield, with moments of tension punctuating even the smallest interactions. One evening, after a heated argument, Nathan found himself alone in the vast living room, staring out over the city lights. Usually, the view gave him a sense of power, but now it felt hollow. He wondered why he was so affected by Jade, this woman he'd married on a whim. She was supposed to be a piece in his game, nothing more, but she was stirring something inside him that he couldn't deny. Nathan couldn't get Jade out of his head, and his obsession with controlling her began to evolve into something more complex. He no longer saw her merely as part of the bet or as a challenge to overcome. He was beginning to view her as a person he genuinely wanted to understand. Despite himself, he was becoming drawn to her resilience, her strength, and the mystery she represented. One night, after a casual dinner with Victor, the friend who had initiated the bet, Victor noticed Nathan's preoccupied expression. "She's getting to you, isn't she?" Victor remarked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Normally, you'd have everything under control by now." Nathan couldn't deny it. Jade was unlike any other woman he'd met, and he wasn't sure how to handle her. For the first time, he felt that he was truly out of his depth. When he returned home that evening, he found Jade sitting alone in the living room, her focus absorbed in a book. Gathering his resolve, he decided it was time for a frank conversation. "Can we talk?" he asked, breaking the silence. Jade looked up, closing her book slowly as she met his gaze. "Of course," she replied, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Taking a seat across from her, Nathan struggled to find the right words. Finally, he spoke with a sincerity that surprised even him. "What are we doing here, Jade? This started as a game, a bet, but I don't know what to think anymore." Jade watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "I'm not playing, Nathan. I never was," she said quietly. "From the beginning, I agreed to this marriage for reasons that go beyond you. I don't care about the money or your control over things. I'm here for something bigger, and if you haven't figured that out by now, maybe it's time to open your eyes." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Nathan felt a flicker of doubt about his place in this game. He realized that Jade had been playing by her own rules all along, and he might have underestimated her. As the weeks passed, Nathan became consumed with curiosity about Jade's true intentions. He hired private investigators, dug into her past, and followed every lead he could find, but she remained an enigma. It was as though she was always 2 steps ahead, controlling the situation with a subtle authority he couldn't break through. One night, after returning late from a business meeting, Nathan found Jade on the penthouse balcony, staring out over the city. The air between them was thick with tension, as though they both knew that something monumental was about to be revealed. "I need answers, Jade," Nathan said, his voice steady but laced with desperation. "I can't keep playing this game. I need to know the truth." Jade sighed and rose slowly from her chair, finally turning to face him. Her eyes, usually calm and guarded, now held a fiery intensity that sent a chill down Nathan's spine. The truth, she asked, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. You have no idea who I really am, do you? Nathan's mind raced as he tried to understand her words. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice strained with confusion. Jade took a step closer, her eyes blazing with anger and pain. My father, Nathan. Do you remember his name? She asked sharply. Nathan searched his memory, but he came up blank. He'd made countless deals over the years, crushed countless competitors. I don't know what you're getting at, he stammered, sensing the gravity of what was coming. You wouldn't remember him, Jade said, her tone laced with resentment. People like you never remember the lives they ruin. My father owned a small business, a company he built from the ground up. Until you came along and destroyed it. The shock hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, speechless, as memories began to surface. Faint recollections of a ruthless acquisition, a hostile takeover that had crushed an entire family. His mind reeled as he tried to connect the dots. My father was an honest man, Jade continued, her voice breaking slightly as she fought back tears. After you ruined his company, he lost everything. The stress and despair drove him to his death. My father took his own life because of what you did, and my mother and I were left to pick up the pieces. The weight of her words was unbearable. Nathan felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. I didn't know. I had no idea, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Of course you didn't, Jade snapped, her voice laced with fury. You've spent your life stepping on others, never looking back at the destruction you left behind. I lost everything because of you. My father, my family's legacy, our future. And you went on living in luxury, completely unaware of the lives you destroyed. Nathan was utterly speechless, the guilt pressing down on him like a lead weight. He wanted to defend himself, to find words that might somehow make this right, but he knew there was nothing he could say. He had done this. He had caused this unimaginable pain, and he hadn't even known. Jade's voice grew steady again as she continued, her gaze unwavering. I didn't come into this marriage for your money, Nathan. I came here with a plan. When I heard about your bet, I saw an opportunity to make you feel even a fraction of the pain you caused me. I wanted you to know what it's like to be manipulated, to be powerless, to lose control. Nathan could feel his pulse pounding as he realized that he had been the pawn all along. Jade had played him from the start, manipulating him with a precision that left him reeling. You think you can control everyone around you, but not me, Nathan, Jade said, her tone sharp. I'm not here to destroy you financially or to ruin your reputation. That would be too simple. I want you to live with the knowledge of what you've done, to feel the pain you inflicted on others, day by day. Her words hung heavy in the air, and Nathan felt as though his entire world was collapsing. He had always been the one in control, the one pulling the strings. But now, standing face to face with Jade, he realized that he was no longer the master of his own fate. In the days that followed Jade's revelation, Nathan was a shadow of his former self. She continued to live in the penthouse, but their relationship had turned cold and empty. Jade barely acknowledged his presence, speaking to him only in clipped, polite phrases that made him feel invisible. The silence was suffocating. Nathan, who was used to commanding attention and respect, now found himself ignored in his own home. Jade's indifference was eating away at him, the quiet contempt in her eyes cutting deeper than any words could. At work, things began to unravel. Nathan started to notice that important meetings were being rescheduled, that deals he'd once had in the bag were falling through without explanation. He could feel Jade's influence everywhere, as though she were pulling invisible strings to dismantle everything he'd built. He knew it was her. Even though Jade never admitted it, he felt her presence in every small defeat, in every instance where his control slipped away. She was tearing his life apart piece by piece, just as he had done to her father's life. And the worst part was she was doing it so quietly, so systematically, that no one else noticed. She was making him suffer in silence. One night, after another disastrous day at work, Nathan returned home to find Jade laughing on the phone. He caught snippets of her conversation and realized she was discussing his latest business failures with a tone of barely concealed satisfaction. As soon as she hung up, he confronted her, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and pain. "You're tearing everything apart, aren't you?" he demanded, his voice low but filled with frustration. "At work here, you're destroying my life." Jade looked at him with a calm, impassive expression. "Destroying your life?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm only giving back what you gave to others, Nathan. Don't worry, I'm not here to ruin you financially. That would be too simple. I want you to live with the knowledge of what you've done, to feel the weight of every small loss, every tiny failure, just like my father did." Nathan felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't just about revenge. This was a calculated, relentless punishment. Jade didn't want to ruin him in one grand gesture. She wanted him to suffer day by day, until there was nothing left of the man he used to be. Weeks passed, and Nathan felt his carefully controlled life disintegrate around him. Jade's silence and cold indifference were far more painful than any heated argument could have been. Each morning, she moved through the penthouse as though he didn't exist, her quiet disdain cutting through him like a blade. She sat at breakfast without a word, avoided his gaze, and left the room the moment he entered. The absence of attention was unbearable. Nathan, who was accustomed to commanding every room he entered, was now being ignored in his own home. It gnawed at him, the emptiness growing day by day as he faced the silent punishment Jade had constructed with chilling precision. And it didn't stop at home. At work, he found himself repeatedly blindsided. Projects he had invested in for years began to fail, and trusted partners questioned his decisions with newfound skepticism. His authority slipped through his fingers, the confidence that once defined him eroding with each setback. He knew it was Jade's doing, even if she never admitted it directly. The invisible strings she pulled, the barriers she placed in his way, were all part of her plan to dismantle his life piece by piece. One evening, after a particularly tense and quiet dinner, Nathan tried one last attempt to break through Jade's wall of silence. Finding her in the living room, he sat beside her and spoke with a voice stripped of its usual arrogance, replaced by something far more vulnerable. "Jade, please. I know I've done terrible things, and I know I've hurt you deeply. But can't we at least try to talk about it?" His voice was almost pleading, his usual confidence now reduced to desperation. Jade set down the book she had been reading and looked at him, her gaze cold and steady. "Talk," she repeated, her tone laced with bitter amusement. "Words mean nothing to me, Nathan. Not after everything you've done. Words are hollow, they can't change the past." Nathan took a shaky breath, struggling to hold her gaze. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try to fix it. I'm willing to do anything to make this right." Jade's gaze turned steely and she stood slowly, looking down at him. "Fix it," she repeated, her voice soft but piercing. "You think you can fix years of pain with a few kind gestures? You can't bring back my father, Nathan. You can't erase the suffering we went through because of your ambition." She leaned in closer, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Nothing you say or do can change what happened. You'll have to live with that, just as I have." And with that, she left him sitting alone in the silent living room, his pleas left unanswered. As the weeks wore on, Jade's quiet revenge became more pronounced. Nathan found himself increasingly isolated, both personally and professionally. Every attempt he made to repair things with Jade was met with indifference or cold rejection. Every step he took to fix the mess he'd made was blocked by the walls Jade had carefully built around herself. One night, After another disastrous day at work, he found her in the living room, once again engrossed in a book. He sat across from her, unable to hold back the frustration that had been building inside him for weeks. "You're tearing me apart," he said, his voice low and raw. "At work, here, you're destroying everything." Jade looked at him with a calm, unfeeling expression. "I'm not destroying anything, Nathan," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm just letting you experience what you've done to others. I'm only returning what you gave." Nathan felt the floor fall out from beneath him. She wasn't going to stop. Jade didn't want to end his life in one swift blow. She wanted to break him down slowly, to make him experience the pain he'd caused, to ensure that he truly understood the consequences of his actions. Nathan's frustration turned to despair as he realized that nothing he could do would bring Jade back to him. She continued to live with him, but it was as though an unbreakable wall had been constructed between them. No matter how much he apologized, no matter how many gestures he made to show her that he was changing, she remained distant, her disdain evident in every cold glance and brief response. Late one night, after yet another failed attempt at reconciliation, Nathan finally broke down. He found himself in the empty living room, staring at the city lights that once symbolized his power and control. Now they felt hollow, a reminder of all he'd lost. And then an unexpected thought struck him. He couldn't fix this with words. Jade needed to see real change, something beyond empty apologies and promises. The next morning, Nathan made a decision. He wouldn't try to persuade Jade with more talk or grand gestures. Instead, he'd show her, through his actions, that he was ready to change. And it would begin with the people he had wronged over the years. With a newfound determination, Nathan decided to confront the damage he had caused in his career. He began reaching out to families and small business owners whose livelihoods he'd shattered in his relentless pursuit of success. His first visit was to a modest home in an unfamiliar neighborhood, a stark contrast to his world of luxury and power. When the door opened, Nathan introduced himself with sincerity. "I'm Nathan Cole," he began, feeling the weight of the past on his shoulders. "I'm here to apologize for the harm I caused your family." The man at the door eyed him with a mixture of shock and bitterness. "Apologize?" he scoffed, clearly skeptical. "What's that supposed to change now?" Nathan took a deep breath, acknowledging the resentment in the man's tone. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to do what I can to make things right. I'd like to offer whatever help you need to rebuild." Over the next few weeks, Nathan continued these visits, offering support to those he'd hurt. He didn't just offer financial compensation. He took the time to listen to their stories, learn about their struggles, and understand the impact his actions had had on their lives. Each meeting was a painful reminder of the person he used to be, but it also fueled his desire to become someone better. Jade noticed his absence in the penthouse but didn't question it. She observed from a distance, cautiously skeptical of his motives but intrigued by his transformation. Although her heart remained guarded, she couldn't help but see the sincerity in his actions. One evening, after another day of reconciliation efforts, Nathan returned to the penthouse to find Jade standing on the balcony, lost in thought. He approached her, carefully keeping his distance to respect her space. "How was it today?" Jade asked, her voice surprisingly soft. She didn't turn to face him but seemed to be listening. "Difficult," Nathan admitted, his tone weary. "But necessary. I needed to see the damage I caused and understand it, really understand it." Jade finally turned to him, her expression guarded but thoughtful. "And what do you hope to achieve by doing this?" she asked, her voice steady. Nathan looked down, considering his response. "I'm not doing it just for you, Jade," he said, his voice filled with genuine resolve. "I'm doing it because I need to be better. I want to be someone who values people, not just profits." Jade nodded slowly, seeming to absorb his words. Though she didn't offer any sign of forgiveness, there was a flicker of something new in her eyes, perhaps respect, or even a hint of understanding. Encouraged by her subtle shift, Nathan began finding ways to show Jade that he was paying attention to who she was, rather than trying to manipulate her. He noticed her preferences and routines, observing details he had overlooked before. One afternoon, Nathan bought a bouquet of her favorite flowers, lilies. He left them on the kitchen table without a note, hoping the gesture would be enough. When Jade returned from her errands and saw the flowers, she paused, studying them for a moment. Though she didn't say anything, she picked up one of the blooms and held it delicately, as if appreciating its simplicity. In the following days, Nathan continued to make small gestures. He prepared her morning coffee just the way she liked it, left out her favorite snacks, and avoided imposing on her space. He tried to demonstrate that he understood the importance of her independence. Jade remained reserved, but Nathan noticed that she began acknowledging his presence with a quiet nod or a brief glance. The walls between them were still there, but small cracks were starting to form, and he held onto those small signs of progress. One evening, after a long, reflective day, Nathan brought Jade a cup of hot tea. She was on the balcony again, wrapped in a blanket and gazing at the city lights. He approached her cautiously, holding the tea out to her without a word. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. "I thought you might want something warm." Jade took the cup, her eyes still focused on the view. For a moment, they stood side by side in silence, the tension between them easing slightly. Finally, Jade spoke, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Why are you doing this, Nathan?" He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his answer. "Because I realized that words don't mean anything anymore," he said, looking out over the city with her. "My apologies can't erase the past. But I'm trying to show you that I've changed, that I want to be someone different, not just for you, but because I need to be better." Jade remained silent for a few moments, as if absorbing his words. The cold wind swept through the balcony, but the tension between them seemed to soften. "You can't change the past, Nathan," she finally replied, her voice holding a note of sadness. "But maybe you can change the future?" Their eyes met for the first time that evening, and Nathan felt a glimmer of hope. Though she hadn't forgiven him yet, her words were a sign that perhaps, with time, she might be willing to let go of the pain. In the days that followed, Nathan continued his quiet efforts, grateful for every small moment of connection they shared. Jade no longer treated him with the same icy distance, though she was far from forgiving him. She allowed him to sit with her at breakfast, sometimes even engaging in light conversation, and Nathan savored every fleeting moment of normalcy between them. But Nathan could sense that Jade was holding back, as if she were waiting for something he hadn't yet uncovered. Her hesitation kept him on edge, and he knew that there was a deeper truth she hadn't yet shared. One evening, after an unusually quiet day, Nathan decided to address the lingering tension. Finding her in the living room, he sat across from her, his voice low but steady. "Jade, I know there's something between us that hasn't been said. I can feel it. Please, if there's anything you're holding back, I need to know." Jade hesitated, her gaze lowering as if she were debating how much to reveal. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, she looked at him, her expression a mixture of pain and determination. "You're right, Nathan," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "There is something I haven't told you. Something I didn't think I could ever share. But maybe it's time." Nathan braced himself as Jade took a deep breath, gathering the strength to reveal what she had kept hidden for so long. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but laced with pain. "Do you remember the company you destroyed, the one my father managed?" she began, her tone steady but her eyes reflecting deep sorrow. "I told you that you took everything from us, that you destroyed my family. But that wasn't the full truth. Nathan looked at her, puzzled and anxious. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jade lowered her gaze, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I was pregnant back then, Nathan. I was going to have a child." Nathan's heart skipped a beat as the weight of her words sank in. He stared at her, stunned, unable to fully process what she had just said. "I lost the baby," Jade continued, her voice breaking. "The stress, the pressure of losing everything, it was too much. And when my father died, when he took his own life because of everything you did, it shattered me completely. I lost everything that mattered to me." Her words hit Nathan like a wave, leaving him speechless. He had known that his actions had destroyed her father's company and cost her family their livelihood, but he hadn't realized the full extent of the devastation. Now, as he looked at her, he saw the depth of the pain he had caused, the suffering he hadn't even known existed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't know. I never could have imagined." Jade looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and anguish. "No, you didn't know," she replied, her voice firm. "Because you didn't care. You never looked at the lives you were destroying. To you, it was all just a game. But to me, it was my life, my family, my future, my child. And you took it all away." Nathan felt the ground crumble beneath him as her words sank in. He had spent so many years chasing power, wealth, and control, never once considering the cost of his ambition. Now, standing before the woman he had hurt beyond measure, he realized just how hollow his success was. In the days following Jade's revelation, Nathan was consumed by guilt and grief. The weight of her loss and the pain he had caused left him feeling broken in a way he had never experienced before. He knew that nothing he could say would bring back what she had lost, but he was determined to atone for his actions, no matter how long it took. One evening, as they sat together in silence, Nathan looked at Jade with a sincerity he had never shown before. "I know I can't change the past," he said quietly, "and I know I can never make up for what I did. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. I can't bring back your father or the child you lost, but I can promise to be a better person, someone who cares and respects others. I'll never take another life for granted." Jade remained silent for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful but unreadable. Finally she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Nathan. What you did, it's something I'll carry with me forever. But maybe, with time, we can find a way to move forward." Nathan nodded, a faint glimmer of hope sparking within him. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning, a fragile foundation on which to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, Nathan dedicated himself to proving that he had changed. He canceled work commitments, making a conscious effort to spend more time at home. Small gestures, like preparing breakfast for Jade or leaving out her favorite flowers, became part of his daily routine. He no longer tried to persuade her with grand declarations or apologies. Instead, he focused on being present, attentive, and respectful. Jade remained cautious, observing his transformation with a quiet reserve. She no longer treated him with outright disdain, but her heart was still guarded, and Nathan respected her need for time and space. Despite the progress, there was a lingering tension between them, an invisible barrier that Nathan couldn't quite break through. He sensed that Jade was still holding something back, a final piece of the puzzle that she hadn't yet revealed. Then, on a quiet, rainy night, Jade's demeanor changed. She seemed more introspective, more distant, as if lost in thought. Nathan noticed her tension and finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Jade," he began softly, "I know there's still something between us that hasn't been said. Please, if there's anything you're still holding back, I need to know." Jade looked at him, her eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she finally spoke. "There is something," she admitted, her voice heavy with sadness. "It's something I didn't think I could ever tell you, but maybe it's time." Nathan waited as Jade gathered her thoughts, feeling a heaviness settle in the air between them. She took a deep breath, her gaze distant, as if reliving a painful memory. "When you destroyed my father's company, I told you how it affected my family," she began, her voice soft but steady. "But there's more. That company wasn't just his livelihood, it was his dream. He built it from nothing, and losing it broke him in ways I can't fully describe. For him, that company was his life's work, his legacy." Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had known he'd caused harm, but he hadn't realized just how much was at stake for the people he'd impacted. "After he passed away," Jade continued, her voice catching, "I promised myself that I would make sure no one would ever forget what you did. That's why I agreed to this marriage, why I went along with the bet. I wanted you to feel the pain, the powerlessness, the devastation that I felt. I wanted you to know what it's like to lose everything." Nathan felt the familiar sting of guilt rise in his chest, his heart aching as he took in her words. He had come to understand that Jade's pain was not just personal, it was also deeply tied to the values her father had instilled in her, the belief in fairness, respect, and integrity. "I spent years planning this," Jade said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted you to feel what you made me feel. But now," she hesitated, her gaze softening, "now I'm not sure anymore. I've seen the changes in you, and I've seen how hard you're trying. I never thought I'd be able to say this, but part of me is beginning to wonder if maybe there's a way to move forward." Nathan's heart surged with hope, and he took a tentative step closer. "Jade," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I can never truly make up for what I've done. But I want to keep trying. I want to be someone worthy of your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life." Jade met his gaze, her expression softening as she took in his sincerity. There was a long silence between them, filled with a mixture of pain and hope. "Maybe we can try," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's going to take time, Nathan. And it's not going to be easy." In the days that followed, Nathan continued to dedicate himself to rebuilding his life, not only for Jade but for himself. He reached out to the people he had wronged, not as a businessman but as a man seeking redemption. Slowly, he began to feel a change within himself, a deep, genuine commitment to becoming someone different from the man he used to be. Jade watched his transformation with a cautious optimism. She no longer held him at arm's length, though the scars of their past still lingered. They began spending more time together, sharing quiet moments and simple conversations, building a fragile foundation of trust. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jade turned to him, her eyes filled with a newfound warmth. "Nathan, I want you to know that I see the changes you're making. And though it may not seem like it, I'm beginning to believe in you." Her words filled Nathan with a hope he hadn't felt in years. He took her hand gently, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. Months passed, and their relationship slowly began to heal. They grew closer, sharing not just words but moments of true connection. Then one morning, Jade noticed something unusual. She felt a slight nausea and a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced before. After a visit to the doctor, her suspicion was confirmed. She was pregnant. When Jade told Nathan, his reaction was a mixture of joy and relief. He embraced her, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the new chance they'd been given. Everything they had gone through, all the pain and heartache, now seemed to lead to this moment of renewal. "I want to do this right, Jade," Nathan said, holding her close. "I want to marry you again. This time, for real. Not for a bet, not as part of any game. Just because I love you." And I want to spend my life with you. Jade smiled, her tears mingling with his. I want that too, Nathan, she replied, her voice filled with happiness. This time, let's build something real. They planned a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by close friends and family. There were no grand gestures, no displays of wealth or power, just the quiet, sincere love they had fought so hard to find. As the months passed, Nathan continued to reach out to the families he had hurt, offering his time, resources, and a sincere desire to make amends. Though he knew he couldn't undo the damage he'd caused, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, driven by a commitment to change not just for Jade, but for their future together. One night, as they sat together on the balcony, watching the city lights, Jade leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented smile on her face. Who would have thought, she whispered, that everything would lead us here? Nathan smiled, holding her close. Who would have thought, he replied softly, that the best thing to ever happen to me started with a foolish bet? They sat together in comfortable silence, filled with a sense of peace and hope. With their love renewed, their future filled with promise, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead together, as partners, as friends, and as a family.